It's an analog computer. It doesn't use digital. It uses wheels and gears. This was a device that we wouldn't see again for another 2,000 years until the 1800s.
When sponge divers pulled a strange chunk of bronze from the ocean in 1901, they had no idea what they'd found. Turns out, it was part of the world's oldest computer. But the most important half was gone. Until now. Thanks to artificial intelligence, that missing piece has finally been rebuilt.
X-ray data of all the 82 surviving fragments of the mechanism. And when we first looked at the results, it was astonishing.
Join us as we explore how AI filled in the blanks, and why what the Antikythera mechanism predicts is freaking out historians. World's first computer found. In the spring of 1900, a group of sponge divers from the small Greek island of Symi set out to work in the waters near Antikythera, a rocky island sitting quietly between Crete and the Peloponnese. When a storm rolled in, they had no choice but to anchor and wait. To pass the time, they dove. One diver went down around 150 feet and came face to face with something eerie. Bronze limbs, twisted and frozen, resting in the darkness. Convinced he had found a ship full of drowned bodies, he raced back to the surface. But what he saw wasn't human. It was the wreck of an ancient ship, littered with life-sized statues and broken relics. In the days that followed, the divers pulled up a treasure trove. Marble sculptures, glassware, coins, and other goods from the past. But tucked among the crates was a strange, corroded lump of bronze and wood. It looked like nothing special, just a mess of metal and rot. So it sat in a museum, forgotten. That is, until 1902. Museum archaeologist Valerios Stais was sorting through the wreck's debris when he spotted something odd. A gear, a small toothed wheel, peeking out from the crusted metal. Not part of a statue, not decoration. A gear. It looked like it belonged in a clock, not a Greek shipwreck. People were skeptical. How could something mechanical come from ancient Greece? At the time, it just didn't make sense. The idea of ancient engineers building machines this complex felt impossible. Years passed. The strange object, now known as the Antikythera mechanism, was studied, debated, and doubted. But as technology advanced, the truth began to surface. Decades later, using X-rays and 3D scanning, researchers peered inside. What they found was astonishing. Hidden inside were dozens of gears, cut by hand, arranged with precision, and built to move in harmony. It wasn't just a machine, it was a kind of ancient computer. Even more incredible, the device had writing on it. Thousands of tiny Greek letters carved into the bronze, numbers, labels, and instructions. A built-in manual, still whispering across centuries. Only 82 fragments of the device have ever been recovered, and most of the front was missing. But those pieces were enough to spark one of the greatest archaeological investigations of all time. And the mystery was only just beginning. X-rays revealed the truth. For over 100 years, the Antikythera mechanism was more mystery than machine. It sat behind museum glass in fragments, twisted, corroded, and half gone. People knew it had gears. They knew it was old, but how it worked, what it actually did, that remained unclear. Then, in 2005, something changed. A team of researchers from Greece and the UK brought in heavy tech, tools the original makers of the mechanism could never have imagined. The most important was a huge, high-powered X-ray machine nicknamed Blade Runner. It wasn't built for archaeology. It was designed for inspecting airplane parts. But, in this case, it was repurposed to scan something far older. A 2,000-year-old device lost at sea. They placed the fragile bronze fragments inside and began to scan from every angle. The machine fired high-energy X-rays through the corroded metal, revealing what had been hidden for centuries. Thousands of slices were collected, each showing a tiny cross-section of the parts inside. Alongside the X-rays, they used a second system called reflectance imaging. It allowed them to light the surface from different directions, digitally bringing out faint scratches and marks that human eyes could barely see. The results were shocking. Inside the fragments, they found far more than just gears. There were Greek letters, tiny, precise, packed close together. These weren't random markings. They were readable. They were data. Each letter was part of an ancient guide. Descriptions, numbers, lists. The machine wasn't just a mechanical wonder. It came with built-in instructions. Piece by piece, researchers began to translate what the mechanism was trying to say. It mentioned the positions of planets. It described eclipse cycles. It named calendar months from a region in western Greece. This wasn't a toy or an ornament. It was a serious tool built for tracking the skies. Some of the gear work had already suggested this, but now the writing confirmed it. The Antikythera mechanism was a time machine of sorts, measuring not just time itself, but where the moon and sun would be, and when eclipses would happen. And yet, not everything went smoothly. A few scans glitched, and some data came out blurry. But years later, researchers went back to the raw files, cleaned them up, and filled in the gaps. New letters appeared. Confusing parts became clear. Eclipses and ancient time. Once scientists could finally see inside the Antikythera mechanism, they started decoding what each part actually did. The best preserved section? The back. And what they found there was stunning. It wasn't just a tangle of old gears. It was a detailed, moving calendar of the sky, designed with incredible accuracy. At the top of the back panel, they found a spiral-shaped dial. It wasn't random. This dial followed something called the Metonic cycle, a 19-year period used by the ancient Greeks to sync the moon and sun. In those 19 years, the lunar and solar calendars lined up again, making it a powerful tool for tracking time. Each small box on the spiral marked a lunar month, 235 in total. Next to that was another dial for a 76-year cycle called the Calippic cycle. This one made the calendar even more accurate. It was like the ancient version of a leap year system, tiny adjustments to keep everything aligned with the seasons. Below that sat another spiral with 223 divisions. This one tracked the Saros cycle, which is about 18 years long and helps predict eclipses. Why 223 months? That's how long it takes for the moon, Earth, and sun to return to almost the exact same positions, meaning an eclipse is likely to happen again. And it didn't stop there. Within that same space, the mechanism tracked something even more precise, the exoligmos cycle, which fine-tuned the timing of eclipses by adjusting for small leftover bits of time. It gave predictions that were surprisingly close to modern calculations. But this machine didn't just tell you that an eclipse would happen. It told you what kind. Each box in the Saros spiral had little symbols. One showed if it was a lunar or solar eclipse. Another gave the time of day. Some even hinted at what the eclipse would look like, whether the sky would go fully dark or just dim. There were short notes about the direction of the shadow or how much of the sun would be covered. All of this was powered by turning a simple crank. Off to the side, there was another dial for a completely different kind of timing, the Pan-Hellenic Games. These were major athletic events held across Greece, including the Olympic Games. The machine tracked them on a 4-year loop, showing how closely sports and the stars were linked in Greek culture. In total, The back of the mechanism was a mix of astronomy, engineering, and tradition. It wasn't just about watching the skies. It was about understanding time, nature, and even human celebration. And all of it was hidden in bronze, beneath the sea, for 2,000 years, until now. The lost half. The back of the device has given us a lot: eclipse cycles, calendar systems, even ancient sporting schedules. But the front, what was likely the most complex and visually impressive side, is mostly gone. Lost to the sea, scattered in time, or simply destroyed when the ship went down. What's left behind are small, worn fragments, pieces of plates, bits of gears, thin slivers of bronze with shallow carvings. No decoration, no storytelling, just numbers, letters, and markings that mean business. These aren't works of art. They're mechanical blueprints etched in metal. Imagine finding a wristwatch with the face ripped off. You can still see where the hands used to spin. You might even find small notes inside that say how many ticks each hand should make per hour. That's what scientists are working with. Just enough to know the machine had logic, but not enough to see it fully in action. The fragments that survived include specific ratios and counts. For example, how many times a planet should return to the same position in the sky over a certain number of years. These ratios weren't made up. They were backed by Greek astronomy and observation. So any attempt to rebuild the front can't just be clever. It has to follow these exact numbers. There's no freedom to fudge the design. It must work within these limits, or it doesn't work at all. That's what makes reconstructing the front so frustrating, and so impressive when it's done right. Each attempt must respect the gear ratios that are carved into the surviving plates. And it's not just about the numbers. There are physical constraints too. The gears can't be too big. They can't bump into each other. Everything has to fit into a case the size of a shoebox. Some plates include island-specific calendars, showing this wasn't a one-size-fits-all tool. It was tailored to a specific region, maybe even a specific user. The inscriptions helped narrow down how the front had to behave, giving clues about the motion of Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. There are also holes, grooves, and notches on the bronze pieces that hint at gear positions, axle paths, and moving parts long since lost. This kind of work takes both precision and imagination. Scholars and engineers don't get to see the whole system. They have to reverse engineer it from clues. They measure teeth on a gear fragment and match it with a number carved nearby. They test hundreds of gear combinations just to see which ones move in the right patterns. Sometimes, a small pinhole in the frame tells them where a shaft had to go, because there's no other place it could have fit. So even though the front is missing, it isn't silent. It speaks in gear counts, carved ratios, and the layout of the remaining plates. It doesn't offer easy answers, but it doesn't leave room for fantasy either. The numbers are too exact for that. The lost half of the Antikythera mechanism might never be fully recovered. But thanks to what remains, and the strict logic of the system itself, we can get surprisingly close. The pieces we have don't just suggest possibilities. They demand solutions that work. They carry the voice of ancient engineers, still guiding modern hands across 2,000 years. AI unlocks the device. For over a century, parts of the Antikythera mechanism remained unreadable, worn down, broken, or simply missing. But recently, artificial intelligence stepped in to do what human eyes alone could not. A team at DeepMind developed a powerful machine learning model called Ithaca. But unlike most AIs, this one wasn't trained to win games or write poems. It was trained to read damaged ancient Greek texts. Ithaca learned from thousands of real inscriptions, spotting language patterns and context clues. On its own, it could guess missing letters with about 62% accuracy, but when used with historians, that accuracy jumped to over 70%. That changed everything. Suddenly, pieces of the Antikythera that were once too faded to read started making sense. The process didn't replace scholars, it teamed up with them. Ithaca offered possibilities. Human experts, trained in language, history, and astronomy, chose the best fit. Together, they filled in gaps that had stayed empty for decades. Some of the most exciting results came from thin bronze plates that once sat on the front of the mechanism. These plates were covered in worn-down writing. But now, with AI's help, clear instructions began to emerge. One decoded line read, "After 462 years, Venus completes 720 synodic periods." Another said, "Saturn returns in 442 years, after completing 427 revolutions." These weren't just poetic statements. They were engineering specs, gear ratios, orbital timings, and mathematical rules that had to be built into the machine. These numbers became blueprints for reconstructing the missing front half. Another critical line uncovered by AI: Mars, 284 revolutions in 284 years. That's one full cycle each year, a rhythm the gears had to match exactly. Even Mercury, the most unpredictable of the ancient planets, had its cycle recorded. 462 years, 1,457 cycles. That single line proved the mechanism accounted for Mercury's tricky motion, something many thought was beyond ancient understanding. These discoveries gave engineers the targets they needed: gear counts, tooth sizes, space constraints. The puzzle started solving itself. What was once mystery became math, and it came straight from the machine's own inscriptions. And perhaps most importantly, AI gave researchers confidence. Before, many readings were shaky, full of debate and doubt. Now, those same readings have stronger backing. Scholars have something solid to build from. Thanks to AI, even the tiniest fragments now speak. They don't just hint, they explain. They guide. They confirm that this ancient device wasn't a guess at the stars. It was a machine built on precision, and AI just helped it say so. Rebuilding the cosmos in brass. A team from University College London took on the challenge of rebuilding the missing front, but not with guesswork. They followed every rule set by the fragments that still exist: the size of the frame, the type of gears used, the numbers carved into the surviving plates, and the space allowed between moving parts. The result was a fully functioning model, on paper and in 3D, that didn't break any rules. It was a complete front-side reconstruction that finally made sense. What made this model different from earlier attempts was that it didn't just look right, it worked. Every gear had a purpose. Every motion was based on real ancient data. The team had to follow strict guidelines. The planetary cycles had to match the inscriptions, the gear shapes had to be realistic for ancient tools, and the whole system had to fit inside the known size of the original box. At the center of the design was a small sphere representing Earth. Around it, the planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, moved in their own paths. Each one followed a known pattern from Greek astronomy, and each motion was recreated using a special type of gear system known as epicyclic gearing. This allowed the planets to move in loops and change speed, just like they appear to do in the sky. To keep everything working smoothly, the team had to get creative with space. The front section of the mechanism wasn't very deep, less than an inch in some areas, so every gear, shaft, and pin had to be carefully placed. They layered the gear trains tightly, with just enough room to turn freely. They even tilted some plates slightly to help things fit better, using an angle that matched the original fragments. One of the most clever solutions came from something small and mysterious. Just a tiny block with a hole in it, found on one of the spokes of the large drive wheel. For years, nobody could explain its purpose. But in this new design, it finally made sense. The block helped transfer motion from the sun gear to the moon gear, crossing over part of the mechanism without jamming the other parts. That small fix unlocked a big piece of the puzzle. Another major win was figuring out how to build Venus's gear system. A separate piece, Fragment D, held part of a gear with a pin and a strange disc. In this model, that disc becomes the core of Venus's motion. The way it connects to the rest of the mechanism lines up exactly with what the gear math demands. It's not just a guess, it fits. The reconstruction also included a clever trick to avoid overcrowding. Some of the outer planets shared gears with the Sun's system, saving space and reducing the total number of parts. Mars and Jupiter, for example, use a shared wheel to perform part of their motion. It's efficient, and likely how the original designers made everything fit without wasting bronze. Altogether, the model uses 69 gears, 35 from the back side and 34 for the newly designed front. Each one was measured, tested, and placed based on what could have actually been built by ancient hands. No modern shortcuts, no digital magic, just bronze, math, and craftsmanship. How the Greeks read the sky. When researchers finally figured out how the front of the Antikythera mechanism might have worked, they didn't just see a clever design. They saw a working model of the ancient sky, built with stunning accuracy. This wasn't a rough prototype. This was precision engineering, down to the tiniest detail. Each planet known to the Greeks, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, had its own cycle, its own motion, and its own set of gears. The team recreated these using something called epicyclic gearing. That's when small gears ride on top of larger ones, which allowed the mechanism to show how planets seem to speed up, slow down, and even move in loops, just like they appear in the night sky. For Venus and Mercury, which move quickly and change direction often, the designers used a clever method called pin and slot gearing. This created the kind of back-and-forth motion the planets appear to make from Earth. It wasn't just mechanical genius, it was astronomy turned into machinery. What's even more amazing? These recreated gear systems match the actual fragments left behind. The number of teeth, the size of the gears, and even the tiny holes in the bronze frame. Everything lined up perfectly. These weren't guesses. They were mechanical solutions backed by hard evidence. And all of this had to fit inside a space smaller than a shoebox. Gears were stacked tightly together, with barely 1/10 of an inch to spare in some places. One wrong move, and the whole thing would jam. But somehow, the ancient builders made it work. And it didn't just work, it showed the sky. At the center of the mechanism's front face was a small dome representing Earth. Around it, thin rings moved in sync, each one carrying a bead or a pointer that tracked a celestial body. You could see the sun, the moon, and all 5 planets slowly rotating in their paths. There was a small ball for the moon, painted half white, half black. As you turned the crank, the ball rotated, showing the moon's changing phases. Full moon, new moon, everything in between. A serpent-shaped hand called the dragon hand slowly swept the dial, marking the 2 points where the moon's orbit crossed the sun's path. When the sun and moon lined up with that hand, the mechanism warned. An eclipse season was near. The sun's pointer moved through the zodiac signs, letting users track the changing seasons. Tiny letters and symbols along the edges matched up with star events. like the first appearance of certain constellations in the night sky. To someone standing in front of it in ancient Greece, this wasn't just a machine. It was the universe, turning before their eyes. A tool that let them read the sky, plan their calendars, predict eclipses, and even track time through the stars. The Antikythera mechanism wasn't built just to impress. It was built to inform. It turned the movement of the heavens into something you could hold, see, and understand. One turn of the crank at a time. Uncomfortable evidence. The Antikythera mechanism isn't just an amazing ancient machine. It's a problem for history. It doesn't fit where we thought it should. For a long time, people believed that advanced mechanical technology didn't show up until the Middle Ages or the early modern era. But here's this device, built over 2,000 years ago, that works like a complex clock. Not to tell the hour, but to show the cosmos. And that raises a serious question. If they could build something this smart back then, what else did they know? Was this just a lucky one-time invention? Or was it part of a larger world of lost knowledge? The unsettling part is, we don't know. No other device from ancient times matches this level of detail. It's as if someone turned on the lights for a moment, showed us what was possible, and then everything went dark again. For over 1,000 years, no one built anything close to this. That's what hits hardest. The real shock isn't just that it existed, it's that it vanished. The skills, the thinking, the precision, it all disappeared, and it makes you wonder how much more could have been lost to time. Maybe it was war. Maybe it was changing priorities. Maybe no one thought to write it all down. Whatever the reason, the Antikythera mechanism stands as a quiet warning. History doesn't always move forward. Sometimes it forgets. Sometimes it leaves its greatest moments behind. And this machine, pulled from a shipwreck by chance, is now telling us we may not know the full story of our past. Not yet. Bronze Age blueprint. We've scanned it. We've studied it. We've modeled it on computers. But now comes the real test. Can we actually rebuild the Antikythera mechanism using only the tools the ancient Greeks had? That's the challenge researchers are taking on. No modern machines, no 3D printers, just the same kinds of hand tools, materials and techniques available over 2,000 years ago. The goal is simple: to see if this masterpiece of engineering could really have been made the way we think it was, because building it in theory is one thing. Making it in real life, without power tools or precision cutters, is something else entirely. Bronze gears have to be cut by hand. Shafts have to be carved and fitted without lasers or drills. Every gear tooth must match exactly, or the whole system will jam. That's how tight the tolerances are. This is no rough model. It's a complex machine, and every part needs to do its job perfectly. If the rebuild works, it proves that the original designers weren't just smart, they were incredibly skilled. It would show that the ancient world didn't just imagine the stars, they built them into a machine. But if it doesn't work, or can't be made without modern help, it might mean we've still missed something. Maybe the Greeks had tricks we haven't rediscovered yet. So the Antikythera mechanism isn't just a piece of history. It's a test, a question from the past. Can we do what they did, with what they had? Until we answer that, the mystery isn't fully solved. The work isn't finished. Thank you for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. More content coming your way. See you next time.